All right, so some folks have been clamoring for an explanation of what's happening in quantum computing and why Fulcrum is so interested in this emerging industry. And it's a hard ask basically because some of the most brilliant minds in the world are doing podcasts and putting out, just really long form content, like multi-hour long conversations about how these quantum computing systems work. And I have the time to sit there and listen to these things. I was actually on a flight back to the US yesterday and listen to this great conversation between Eric Schmidt and Brian Greene, who I think is a physicist at Columbia or a professor of physics. And it's kind of it was sort of an annoying conversation to listen to because Brian Greene, no offense to him, I don't know much about him. Maybe he's a brilliant teacher or a really good physicist, but it's like listening to your high school teacher interview Emperor Palpatine. Like Eric Schmidt should either be interviewed by somebody who's able to keep up with him, or should just be given the floor to say what he wants to say. And he kept getting interrupted by Brian Greene's kind of like, "Oh wow, gee whiz, ChatGPT really does a lot" kind of comments, and "Oh, this is scary, right? It's terrifying. It's scary." Well, why is it scary? Why would quantum supremacy be so scary? And one of the reasons I know this is a big deal is that I've read some of the white papers of projects and ideas that are designed to be quote unquote quantum proof. And maybe I'm just an idiot, but I read these things and I'm like, well, if it really takes off to the extent that we think it will, quantum supremacy, then these ideas like extended Merkle signature schemes and stuff are not going to do the job because they're not imaginative enough, right? They don't understand what unlimited compute actually looks like, and that solving for even very specific hash functions I think will be possible in the future. So it's like, I guess what I'm getting at is like right now there's a lot of excitement among the nerdiest communities online. And this is exactly where crypto was at more than a decade ago, where people are saying, oh wow, this proof of work idea is a really big idea that anybody in the world with a graphics card can just mine, quote unquote, mine for money. You can just have a chance of earning Bitcoin in this basically global lottery. And to pay for your ticket to the lottery, you just have to hand over your graphics card or your CPU and connect it to the internet and give it some energy, pay your utility bill or find a free source of energy like a windmill or something. And there you go. You're going to actually like create money out of thin air in the form of mining for the Bitcoin network. And again, this is a realization that many of us had more than a decade ago. And it was weird at first because like the smartest people in the world were saying this is a big deal. And yet it seemed like the world had not changed. And now Bitcoin is a more than $2 trillion asset class thing, right? More than $2 trillion market cap. And just an hour ago or so, Trump announced he wants to do a digital asset stockpile, which would include Bitcoin, among other crypto assets potentially. Incredible how far things have come. But point being, today the new thing that's on the fringes that the nerdiest people are freaking out about is quantum computing. And among people who have jobs and kids to raise and health issues to master and a lot of other stuff going on in the real world, they're of course not spending hours a day listening to podcasts from people like Eric Schmidt or Jan LeCun or any of these other kind of AI and quantum computing visionaries. They're not listening to this stuff, and they're certainly not reading white papers on XMSS and other proposed ways to combat quantum attacks in the future. And so how do you put this in a simple terms for everybody? Like basically what's happening, and I know some of the really technical people will leave comments on this podcast episode saying I'm oversimplifying and like bastardizing a couple of concepts. Fair enough, right? Absolutely fair. Imagine you have some valuables, some like asset that was handed to you from your grandparents or something, some family heirloom that you want to keep safe. And so you put it in a lockbox, and the lockbox has a key, and you lock it, and only you have the key. And you can give the key to somebody else if you want a family member to have access to that heirloom. You give them your key, and then they can access the lockbox. And that's much the way that existing cryptography works for quote-unquote secure transactions on the internet. So you hand over your credit card number or your banking details, and you're putting it in essentially a digital lockbox, and somebody on the other side, the credit card processor, who has the SSL certificate, they have the digital key to unlock that lockbox and to take your goods out, and whatever the case may be, your credit card number or your encrypted email message or whatever it is, and they can access your data, but not the whole world. The whole world can't access it. All the whole world sees is that there's a lockbox in the form of encrypted junk-like data, right? Data that cannot be interpreted. And let's say someone who's not a family member wants to get into that lockbox, to use this analogy. They really want to get into your lockbox and either steal your heirloom or just look at it or maybe take part of it or mess with it. Maybe they just sort of mutilate it because they're mean and then put your priceless object back in the lockbox. And so what they could do is they could create a million different keys. They could make a million different physical keys. Maybe they have a fast way of doing this. They can make them out of plastic or ceramic or something, right? 3D printed. 3D printing would work also. So they have some very fast method of creating potential keys, knowing that your lockbox is pretty primitive and only so many different combinations of keys exist, right? The ridges on the key. There are only so many different ways you can design that before you've fulfilled all possibilities. And so this person decides to make the million keys, and then they can get into your lockbox. But in reality, this person doesn't exist, right? Because there's something called time. We don't live for 20,000 years. We live for 70 or 80 years on average. And so in that time, this person can't create a million keys. They can create maybe 1,000 keys, let's say, or 10,000 keys. And there's a good chance they're not going to get into your lockbox, right? Just given simple probability. They're not going to get in time to where it's useful to them. Sure, if they were making keys for the next 10,000 years, they could get the contents of your lockbox. But for all intents and purposes, they can't due to time, right? You're protected by time and by the physical limits of computational power. So now imagine you have like a magician. You have some weird person who comes into your town, and they can create a million keys immediately. They snap their fingers, and there are a million keys. And you don't know how it works, but you've seen that whenever they snap their fingers, they can produce a million keys. And they also have another weird ability, which is they can jam the million keys into your lockbox at once. And this sounds nonsensical to you, but this magician has gone from town to town and has built a reputation for himself as being able to do this. He snaps his fingers, creates a million keys, and at the same moment, those million keys are all jamming into the lock at the same time. Well, in such a ridiculous scenario, this person can access the contents of your lockbox, guaranteed, right? If they can make a million keys in a millisecond and also try them all out simultaneously, they have access to what's in there. And quantum computing makes use of quantum mechanics, which were discovered just over the last century. It's a lot of weird stuff that doesn't make sense to us logically. As humans who live for 70, 80 years, and we run at a maximum of, 15 miles per hour. If we're not in a car, that's our maximum speed, right, by foot. It's like 15 miles an hour. We think at a speed that's pretty slow. I don't know if this is accurate, but people have speculated that the download speed of a human brain to some other format, if we could do it, would be like 10 bits per second, which is incredibly slow. So we don't have unlimited compute, right? And so it's hard for us to think of things like quantum mechanics, where you take a subatomic particle like an ion and you change it in some way. You flick it, right? You flick it or you give it a little poke. And then this subatomic particle's mirror, we can place it at the other edge of the universe from us. We can place it, in another galaxy. Its mirror will it'll respond to the flick at the same, moment as the other particle that it's entangled with. And this is the most absurd notion, again, to us mammals that can run at a maximum of 15 miles per hour. And we're cruelly given only 70 or 80 years of time and space. How can something work like this? How do you flick something and at the same time its counterpart feels it in the exact same time? Well, I'm not here to debate quantum mechanics. It's a real thing. That's one of the properties of it. And you can exploit that property such that there's no transfer time. For computing, for processing, there's no transfer time. Whereas with the circuit board, no matter how good you get at creating circuit boards, the electricity or the data or the flick, this idea of just changing something, this flick actually takes time no matter what. To change state on a circuit board, you're sending data across basically a piece of metal. And although it's very fast, it still takes up space and time. It's still limited by physics. Whereas with quantum entanglement and things like superposition is the second part of the magician's ability, where he can jam those million keys into your lockbox all at once. It sounds nonsensical to us. We only have 2 hands. We only have 24 hours in a day. How can anybody shove a million keys into one lock at once? Well, that's just how superposition works. And in quantum computing, these qubits can be not just 1 or 0, but they can be both states at once. They can explore the outcome of both states at the same time. And then you multiply it across all the qubits that you have interacting with each other, and it becomes exponentially faster than any traditional computer. Again, the way to think about this is that a circuit board is traveling distance. It's moving through space and time to deliver data and to process things. Whereas the quantum computer, since it's using these kinds of tricks that we don't fully understand, but they do work, tricks like quantum entanglement, where you flick one ion and the other one responds at the same moment, even if it's a distance away, this is a game changer. So you harness this weird kind of the Force-like ability, which is quantum mechanics. You're then suddenly able to do what seems impossible in almost no time at all, in a matter of milliseconds. And the world seems a lot the same as it was a decade ago to most people. If you walk into Best Buy, the laptops look pretty much the same, and the cameras and stuff, they have better resolution, but they're pretty much the same as a decade ago. They don't work in some fundamentally different way. They still have a lens and a sensor behind that lens that captures the light and changes it into digital data. And you don't walk into Best Buy and it's like all a bunch of humanoid robots and stuff, like in the sci-fi movies or a Black Mirror episode. It seems like Best Buy of 10 or 15 years ago, right? So this isn't the case if you work in research or if you're investing in certain quantum or AI companies. You see that something very different is happening. And if you've rode the crypto wave from 0 to a multi-trillion-dollar market cap, and having a U.S. president say that we should be creating a digital asset stockpile comprised of the leading cryptos or Bitcoin, to see these things happen, you see that something is changing in the world. Or if you drive a Tesla and you turn on the autopilot, full self-driving, and you drive, from one city to another, and it's like essentially being a passenger in a train, then the world is different from how it was in 2012 or 2015. Very different. And so these people who are close to the quantum computing industry they see and they say that this is kind of like a Robert Oppenheimer Manhattan Project moment. This is like the Hiroshima for all computer science that has come before. Because if you can open up that lockbox, that means that the Instagram account that belongs to Kim Kardashian or Bill Gates, when Bill Gates posts, I like vaccines, when he does one of his little social media posts, what tells Instagram or Twitter that that's actually him posting is the lockbox setup, that he has his password. And Instagram knows what his password is. But the rest of the world doesn't know what his password is. And if the rest of the world knew it, or if a random person knew it, they could for a time post as Bill Gates until the world realized it was not Bill Gates. And so with strong enough quantum computing, as weird as it sounds, you can simply do this. When you're not dealing with ones and zeros, but ones and zeros at the same time, and when you're not dealing with small amounts of space where electricity or data has to traverse, necessarily paying a toll in time and space, when you're instead doing it truly instantaneously, then a whole new world becomes possible. And the Bitcoin promoters, Bitcoin maximalists, who really believe in a fairer world, like a more equitable world, if we all have fairly mined cryptocurrency and a blockchain where you can see all the transactions, even the 50-cent transactions, even the transactions that are very small, all the way up to the multi-million-dollar transactions, the whole public can access that on the blockchain using what's called a blockchain explorer. You can see all that data for yourself. And these people really believe in this. It's almost a priesthood, right? I was talking to a guy the other day, and I was telling him that I invest in some of the Bitcoin ETFs because it's like, where do you find a more committed group of asset holders? People who hold gold, if the price of gold dipped, they would sell. They have no real loyalty to this yellow metal. They're just in it to protect themselves. And that's not true with Bitcoin. It's a priesthood of people who actually believe this is a better way to do money. It's a better way to do commerce. The blockchain, the irreversibility of transactions, the mere 10-minute confirmation time before funds are settled, all of it, the 24/7 nature, the fact that it doesn't matter what country you're from, they truly believe in this new world of crypto. And their little bubble bursts, as does everybody else's. Their little bubble bursts the second that anyone in the world turns on a sufficiently strong enough quantum computer. And then you go out further. Again, if you want to listen to like the Eric Schmidt podcast with Brian Greene, or if you want to listen to some of the talks by AI researchers at OpenAI, if you want to watch these things and listen to these things, I absolutely encourage you to, right? Because I'm not doing justice to these topics. But to summarize it, if you go out further along the quantum yellow brick road, not only can you impersonate Bill Gates for a time without the world knowing, which would cause havoc potentially to world markets, right? Because if you can do Bill Gates, you can do every other celebrity at the same time. That's what's so hard for your little human monkey mind and my little human monkey mind to understand, is suddenly we're in a world where the computing doesn't scale in some linear way. It scales in a non-linear way that approaches a maximum of near infinite ability. It's very hard for us to grasp. But if you can unlock one lockbox, you can unlock them all, is the thing to grasp here. And suddenly all the private communications of government employees emailing each other on very secure email servers, it becomes clear text to whoever has enough time or money to build a quantum computer. And it might not be some nice person in Northern California who's being overseen by the US government. It might be somebody in a country that hates us. Or it might be some Bond villain who just has the resources to do this. And that day is sadly coming where someone or something is going to have enough computational power because of these quantum chips that are being built. Enough computational power to turn the whole world into clear text. You know, for years, the truth community created a lot of fear porn and a lot of engagement bait around the World Economic Forum, Klaus Schwab's statement, you'll own nothing and be happy, right? And it's obviously an Orwellian kind of statement that we should balk at. I think that's totally fair. But this quantum computer stuff is like the realization of that in an actual tangible way. You will literally own nothing digital because nothing is private anymore. If you have a quantum computer, whoever holds access to that quantum computer, to that terminal, could potentially see all the world's most secure data as if it was a clear text message being sent to their cell phone. Think of it that way. And that's the level of disruption that's ahead. Imminently. But then again, further out is stuff like you could turn on a quantum computer in your city, and then everybody who has these VR goggles, like the Meta goggles, right? Or the Apple Vision Pro, everybody who has these things can suddenly watch a three-dimensional movie that's been handcrafted for them based on their past memories. I mean, who's going to go to the movies anymore? Who's going to watch cable news? Who's going to care about the national narrative? Who's going to read news websites? Who's going to even check their fucking email? When you can tune in every night to a brand new, like, Martin Scorsese level movie or James Cameron or something that a quantum computer has designed for you to be just for you, you know? I mean, that's the end of Hollywood and the whole content industry as we know it, and that's not necessarily a terrible thing by any means. So from a nation state perspective, let's say one of the countries that does not like the US and wants to slow down our growth or even our survival, not sure if this is recording properly, but okay. Let's say that one of these countries suddenly has sufficiently powerful quantum computer. If we go to battle with them, if we go to war, within the first few minutes of the war, their quantum computer scoops up all the available data on how we're fighting and what we're doing. And it runs through its little Monte Carlo simulations of various outcomes and probabilities of loss or gain, win or loss. It runs through these simulations, and it doesn't run through 10 million simulations. It runs through a literal infinite number of simulations until it finds the best outcome for whichever country is running it. And then that country's generals say, oh, okay, cool, let's do that. Let's do this. And they win the war almost immediately. And they think that this will work for drug discovery also, for new pharmaceuticals where in the laboratory they're limited by time and money, how many drugs they can test out, right? And then their computer simulations are better. They can run millions of simulations. They can run millions of digital trials. But they can't find an infinite number of molecules because there's just not enough time. There just is not enough time in our lives to try out everything. Well, a sufficiently powerful quantum system could try out every single molecule combination that is known in the physical universe, and then run basically clinical trials in a quantum reality of fake human bodies, and then give you an answer and tell this drug company, tell Pfizer or whoever, here's your new blockbuster. What kind of capitalism is that? You know, both for better and worse. It's like going to create some powerful kind of semi-monopolies, but also we're going to get amazing products, like things we can't even think of right now. Once we hitch AI and the R&D cycle to sufficiently powerful quantum systems. Literal Star Trek stuff, folks. So hopefully this helps a little bit. And I'll do a blog post later in the week linking to some stuff that people should read. And I can probably explain it better if I link to my sources. But this is the level of craziness we're dealing with. And people will say, well, when is this going to happen? You know, if only I knew when. You know, if only man knew the time of the day of when this apocalypse would come. And I don't mean a literal apocalypse, because it could be great. Maybe it's awesome afterwards. You know, the argument that it's terrible is because we can't see what comes after. If everybody for free could tune in every single night to, again, a like Academy Award winning production designed just for them, I think people will be willing to trade their meager incomes in many circumstances and their privacy. They'd be willing to trade that to some crazy AI that has harnessed quantum computing power, or some dictatorship that has harnessed it, because that would be such a kind of soma to get the people hooked on. And if you could develop drugs that cost almost nothing, that cured cancer for like 99.999% of the population and gave people a lifespan to 200 or beyond, would people not sign up for that even if they lost their text message privacy and their ability to use a credit card? Because credit cards would be done. Your bank balance would be done. So once quantum supremacy comes along, whoever gets there first may not announce it. They may decide to have a little bit of fun before they announce it. So they could go in and they could edit bank balances because, again, they have access to the lockbox. They could tell the computer server that they are Bank of America. And they could change your bank balance, give you $1 trillion just to see what you do, or take away all your money for the same reason. And they could post things that are from celebrity accounts that aren't actually them, right? Because, again, they're just able to access that celebrity's password. They could change historical entries on sites like Wikipedia. They could go back in time essentially by deleting entries on the kind of authority sources like Google and Microsoft, Bing, and all this stuff. They could go back, delete old entries, change the publication time, because they'd have basically root level access to all these traditional servers at once. They would know everybody's password. And again, whoever got there first would probably not announce it to the whole world and just take a little trophy or get a little pat on the back. Maybe they would want to use it to their advantage first. And so this is the level of craziness we're dealing with. But again, in terms of when, it could be in 5 years, it could be in 20 years, but it could also be in 18 months. It could also be in 6 months. So, welcome your comments.